couple of months ago, I went back to my hometown to visit my family and friends over Easter. I usually stay at my father's house, and I did so this time as well, even though he and his girlfriend were on vacation. The house is very big with a big garden and fence around it, but the gate is always open and I don't have a key to lock it. And even if I did, I would never have thought of locking it because my dad lives in a very fancy part of the town in wealthy country where all of the embassies are. I've literally never had anything unusual happen to me in this neighborhood. So, I'm alone in this huge house, and I've never felt unsafe in any way. The guest room is located on the ground floor and has a window that points right out to the driveway and one into the garden. Neither window has curtains, which did make me feel uncomfortable at times, as I have a habit of staying up late with the light on, so I'd be easily visible from outside. So, one night I'm on my way home from a night out with my friend, and as my dad's house is so close to the city center, I decided to walk home. The first 3/4 of the way goes along this main street with many streetlights and tram stops every few hundred meters. It is at one of these tram stops that I notice a guy sitting on his bicycle. I don't know why it took him to note, but something must have just felt wrong about him. Even then, cause it kind of stuck in my mind. Thinking back, it might have been the way that he looked at me. Anyway, I continue up the street and glance back once, but this guy is still sitting there on his bike, so I forget about him. Around the next tram stop, I get this weird feeling on the back of my neck, and I can hear someone about 3 meters behind me on a bicycle. Without looking back, I go to the very edge of the sidewalk and let them pass, but they never do. I started to get uncomfortable and walking slower to make them pass me. I mean, I'm walking and they're on a bike, so why would they go slowly as well and not just pass me? I finally took a look at them, and wouldn't you know, it's the same guy from earlier. I faced up ahead again and think fast. At the next crossing, I would have to go to the less lit side of the street with absolutely no people around. I decided to go to the nearby tram station instead and pretend that I'm waiting, even though it must seem pretty obvious that I wasn't, since this guy must have seen me pass 2 tram stations and the line would have gone back the way I came from. So I stand there and look back at him, and he stops his bike and just stares at me for a couple of seconds, then rides off and disappears behind a waiting booth. I never see him come out. After a few minutes, I decided that I've waited long enough and go into the dimly lit side of the street, leading home all the way while looking back every 5 seconds. I finally arrive home, and this time I make sure to close the gate outside, but I don't have a key for it, so I can't lock it. I go into my room a little uneasy, and this time I take off my shirt and bra in the corner outside of view of either window. I want to put my pajamas on, but it's on the bed, so I have to go over there topless thinking, well, it's just a second, and besides, there's no way this guy followed me here. I move to the bed, and bam, a camera flashes, clearly coming from the garden. I instantly jump to the light switch, turn it off, and drop to the floor. I lie there for a few seconds in shock. Then my eyes started watering, and I started sobbing like a baby. I think about everything for the next few minutes, trying to convince myself that I just imagined it, but I am 100% sure of what I saw. The flash even came from the exact spot between the 2 trees, where I always thought that would be the perfect spot for a stalker to hide out. So, I called the police, and while waiting for them to show up, I go to the kitchen and grab a knife, all the while trying to stay away from the windows. Thankfully, 2 officers showed up within minutes, one going directly into the garden, the other coming inside and asking me about this incident, and so on. Of course, they don't find anything since my reaction to the flash was obvious, and the creeper must have ran off. but I felt a lot better after they told me that they would be on the lookout around the neighborhood. And usually this kind of person doesn't try to break in or do anything violent. Funnily enough, after they left, I instantly fell into a deep, calm sleep. I was unreasonably paranoid, and I was very jumpy for the next 2 days though, and I took some bed sheets and clamped them between the window and the wall. I never told my dad or his girlfriend about this, because she is a district attorney and always is super paranoid about her privacy. I'm not even allowed to take photos around the house, in case a criminal could trace them back somehow. So I didn't want to worry her about some lame creep who has nothing to do with her. Hi, I am new to this subreddit, but I have quite a few stories to share, be it my own experiences or my parents' experience. Needless to say, here's one of the more interesting ones of the lot. I was 14 at the time, so keep that in mind for the context. I was sat on my bed in my house on my own as usual. My parents were going to be late for the night, and we lived in a very peaceful area, so even the strictest parents would have left their son to watch over the house. As I was on my laptop watching videos, I heard a knock from the door. Mind you, this is 2 a.m., and I was already paranoid from my previous experiences. There was no way I was going to answer that door, but it piqued my curiosity. Since my house has 2 floors, there was a window right above the door where I could pull back one of the blinds and just easily see who was at the door. My porch light was on, so light wasn't too much of a problem. Even though my paranoia peaked, I had to look to see who was outside. When I looked, there was nobody. At all. I was about to place the blinds back down when I saw someone under the light at the end of the cul-de-sac and almost jumped backwards. This person was in a conveniently suspicious-looking hoodie and tracksuit with no light showing on their facial features. His arms were to his side, and he was just staring directly at me. It was weird. He didn't move at all. He just stood there, under the light. After what seemed to be like 10 minutes or so, he just turned around and walked into the darkness of the main street. I sighed and went back to watching my videos. Perhaps he was just some weird guy who came from the train station near my house. I had no idea, but any justification was better than the alternative. Eventually, around 3 a.m., I fell asleep. I woke up about 4:40 to the sound of my dog silently growling behind me. I thought it was because he wanted to go out into the garden, so I turned around and froze in terror. The person from the street. He was in my doorway. No light hit him in the front, and so even then I could only see the outline of his face. We had another moment where I just stared into this void which was his face, only for him to break the silence with advice which seemed silly at first glance, but I have forever taken it to heart since. Lock your back door. As he did the last time, he turned around towards the stairs and, with me still frozen in place, left my house through the back door. When I wasn't frozen stiff of fear, I sprinted downstairs and got to the back door. He was in the garden. I could only see his outline. He stayed still for a moment, only to sprint off into the woods. I never found out who he was. I didn't care to tell my parents what happened, and yet to this day, they still ask me why I insist on keeping the back door locked. Honestly, I believe he was a warning. If he had been an unstable psychopath, I wouldn't be here right now. Considering some experiences I have had since, I say locking the doors, even in the peaceful areas, is great advice. So, 2 a.m. security checker. Thank you. Even if your intentions were bad, I still learned something from you. But even so, let's not meet. So, this actually happened to me today, and I felt like I needed to share it, just so that I could share to be cautious for others. I live in a small city not too far from Edmonton, and recently, there has been a series of armed robberies happening around the area. It's made me very wary of walking alone at night, so I have found myself at home at nights more than often. It's not the worst, but I dislike having that feeling of unease. But I managed to make do. So, today, my dad and his girlfriend were invited to some party, meaning I was left to watch the whole house myself. I pretty much had the evening planned out, watching some episodes from my favorite soap opera, then switch it over to some classic horror films. So I said bye to them as they left, and quickly loaded up the TV. It was not long after that I started up the horror movie. I heard this weird knock at the door. It wasn't a regular knocking. If my TV had been up any louder, I probably wouldn't have been able to hear it. Thinking it was nothing at first, I went over to the door without pausing the movie just to confirm. But to my surprise, there was someone at the door. I opened the door and there stood a slim man, looked to be in his mid-30s, and that's all I can pretty much say. I'm not the best when it comes to describing people, and I didn't really go out of my way to analyze him at the moment. I couldn't even tell you if his jacket was gray or black. The man said he represented a security company that was going around the area to offer his company's services. He asked if the owner of the house was home, to which I told him no, and that they wouldn't be home till late. He then began giving me a quick demonstration about his company, that it was the only one that was locally funded, that it's already being used by several homes on my street, and that it's smart device friendly. He even showed me a laminated piece of paper that displayed all the different devices that I could work with the security system. I told him that we weren't interested in having a security system at this time. He proceeded to ask me if my family leaves the house on long trips, which would be a great reason to get a security system. Looking back now, this was a huge red flag, but I answered honestly and told him that we almost never have the house empty and that we never really went on trips. I also added that he could speak to my dad tomorrow when he is coming back. He told me that his team would be leaving for another city tomorrow, thanked me for my time, then left. I went back to my movie and pretty much forgot about the visitor. Movie finishes, and I decided to check Facebook to glance at the buys and sells. Near the top of my feed is a shared post that caught my eye immediately. What I read next made me completely freeze up. It was from a woman who had also talked to a representative of the exact same security company I had been advertised to. This guy knocked on her door softly too, which immediately caught my attention. She noticed how this guy never gave his name or a business card, something I didn't even realize that happened until I thought back. Overall, she was very suspicious of the guy, so she asked him to wait outside as she got her pen and paper to write down his phone number. When she returned, he was gone. The next door neighbor told her that she saw this man running down the road and into an alley. But the biggest fact that this woman dropped, she contacted the security company, and it actually does exist, and they told her that they didn't send anyone out of the city to go door to door. The shared post is blowing up, and it seems that it occurred to a lot more people than just me. Some people even showed a video of the security cameras of these employees. There's definitely more than one person pretending to work for this company, one even being a woman, and a lot of strange activity has been reported. One person going into the backyard without permission, another person standing in front of that person's house, like they were scoping it out. Knowing all of this now, it makes the entire encounter with that guy at my door more terrifying. Was he trying to scope my house too? Or would he have tried to do something if I didn't answer? I also wonder, was he hesitant on trying anything because I did pause my movie? For all he knew, I could have had a friend over. Luckily, nothing suspicious happened from the rest of the night, but I will be extremely cautious from now on. If there's one thing that I would advise, be suspicious of anyone you don't know that comes to your house. Just because someone says they work for a company doesn't make it true. You don't know who they are or what they might actually do to you. The story happened to me in the early 2000s. I was vacationing in the Caribbean with my family when I was about 9 or 10 years old. This particular island, like many in the Caribbean, was largely impoverished. Of course, the resort communities where all of the tourists flocked to was a very beautiful slice of paradise. As a young kid staying at this fancy vacation spot, you don't really think about the reality that you're in a foreign country that you don't know very well. You're not familiar with what goes on outside of those gates of the resort, and certainly aren't aware that, as well as being known for gorgeous beaches, many islands in the Caribbean are hubs for human trafficking, drug smuggling, and etc. The sheer sketchiness of what I'm about to describe didn't fully hit me until years later when I was in high school and reading about the disappearance of Amy Bradley and Natalee Holloway, who both vanished while on vacation in the Caribbean in the late 1990s, early 2000s. One night, I left the resort with my family to go on one of those sunset boat rides, one of those sort of deals. We joined another family and took a shuttle to the marina that was maybe about half an hour away from the resort. I remember as we rode to the marina, I got more and more of a sense of how destitute this whole less touristy area was on the island. I saw many of the locals living in small ramshack huts made of salvaged metal, and the landscape was just like a barren desert, unlike the lush gardens that were watered daily within the walls of the resort. Anyway, the shuttle dropped us off at the docks, and we went for our boat tour. It was an amazing time. The boat's crew pointed out unique wildlife and told us about the history of the islands. By the time we returned to the docks, it was pitch black outside, probably around 11 p.m., and barely being 10 years old, I was thoroughly exhausted. I hopped out of the boat and walked along the dock back to the parking lot where the shuttle had dropped us off earlier. My parents and the other adults who were with us didn't really seem to pay any attention to me, thanks to Captain Morgan and Stella Ortiz. And by the time that they got off the boat, I was a decent 200 feet ahead of them. Now, the marina itself was very well lit, but as soon as I turned the corner to the parking lot, I may have just fallen into a cave of darkness. I could hardly see anything. I squinted my eyes to try to see if that van that we had arrived in was in the parking lot nearby. But after a few seconds, somebody suddenly grabbed my shoulder very tight. "Who did you come here with?" The voice scolded, and I immediately began freaking out because I thought I was in trouble. "Somebody drove you here." I began to speak to try to explain that I was with my family and that we were waiting for our driver, but this man cut me off. "You drove here with me. Here, come to my car." At this point, this man began pulling me further into the darkness of the parking lot, towards a vehicle I had never seen before. I wouldn't even say that I was panicking at this point. I was very confused and knew that something was definitely not right about this situation. But I'd been raised to just always listen to adults and didn't want to get in trouble for not listening to this guy. But as he continued to pull me toward his car, I realized that this was way too small to fit the number of people that had arrived with us. And then I had started pulling against this guy, trying to break his grip. I was about to raise my voice and start screaming, when suddenly, a set of floodlights turned on and lit up the parking lot. My parents and the group of people that we were with turned the corner and the guy immediately let go of my arm. I looked up at him and all I remembered is how scary he looked. He was bald and had scars on his face. He was probably in his late 40s. Clearly, he didn't realize that the entire group of people were about 30 seconds behind me. His eyes were wide, and he had a dumbfounded "oh shit" expression. One of the men who had worked for the dock called out and said something to him, but he sort of threw up his arms and shrugged and quickly walked away. On my way back to the resort, my dad asked me something along the lines of, "What did that guy want from you?" And in my childish naivety, I said, "I think he thought that I rode with his shuttle, and maybe he thought that I was lost or something." And apparently this explanation was a perfect, reasonable one, because we never really spoke about it again. Anyway, I guess the moral of the story is, if you have young children and you end up taking them to some exotic, unfamiliar locations, remind them to be smart and keep their guard up, even in paradise. My wife and I were married during the summer of 2012 and planned our honeymoon trip to one of our favorite vacation spots, Aruba. We had arrived in our hotel and began immediately mingling downtown and soaking up the sunshine at the beach. As we visited a very prominent hotel, we heard the bar there was amazing. We noticed a sign for free horseback rides. The catch was you had to sit through one of those very long and drawn-out timeshare speeches and actually see the timeshare housing at the hotel. We got through that and we were given horseback riding vouchers. The next day I called the horseback riding company and requested their service and told them that we had the vouchers for payment. They said they had an opening in the next 2 days and they would pick us up from the hotel. Fast forward to a few days later, the company arrived at our hotel and picked us up in an old, rundown, beat-up van. Upon entering the van, I noticed that the driver's dashboard was lit up like a Christmas tree. I had never seen so many lights on, at once. We close the doors and he drives up to this ranch. We can hear all sorts of noises that sounded like this van was crumbling underneath us. We get to the ranch and there are no other riders there, just us. It is a very remote area of Aruba, across the island away from the other tourist sections. He tells us to wait over near the shed and he will be right back. As I look around, I see no horses and I notice something weird. As I look through the shed window, I see it is completely empty. I walk over to the house and look through the huge glass door. Empty. My wife and I immediately got a feeling of dread, and as if something really bad was about to happen. As the owner comes back around the house, I ask where the other riders are. He says it's just me and my wife. Wouldn't he just wait for more riders just to save money? Seems kind of like a waste of time. I told him that my wife was feeling really sick, and that we just wanted to go back to the hotel. He starts begging us to stay, and asking her to just hang out and see if the nausea will stop and wait it out. Maybe it would pass, he said. I told him that I was going to go now, or I will walk. He very slowly walks us back to the van, gets in the van, and turns the ignition. It won't start. He exclaims, "I must have run out of gas." He then gets on the phone and begins speaking in a language that sounded like Spanish. He was shouting and sounded very upset. He hangs up the phone and says that somebody is coming to meet us there to fix the car. I immediately take my wife by the hand and we leave that van and start walking very fast back to the hotel. As I am walking, I see a taxi car in somebody's driveway. As I look closer, I can see somebody is sitting on the front porch. I ask, "Can you give us a ride back to the hotel?" The gentleman on the porch did a double take, as he seemed like he couldn't believe that tourists were walking around in his neighborhood. He says, "Yes." Then we get into his car, and he starts taking us home. He asks us where we're from. We tell him, insert city here, Connecticut. He starts listing cities around our hometown and asks us a bunch of questions about Yale University. We get to our hotel, pay our fare, and immediately run to the front desk and reported what happened. The front desk clerk said that they don't typically work with that company, and that is why they don't recommend their guests going to other hotels and obtaining excursion vouchers. What would have happened next? Probably nothing, but with Natalie Holloway in our minds and the proven act of sex trafficking, anything was possible. To the guy that drove us in a sketchy serial killer van and took us to an abandoned ranch, let's not meet again. The video game Super Mario Sunshine has always instilled a sense of anxiety in me. It brings me back to the memories of a troubled time when I was very anxious in the most innocent years of my life. When I was 5 years old, my family took me on a vacation to a sun-soaked island in the Mediterranean. I won't say which one, but it was a very popular destination for many. My memories of this vacation are happy for the most part, except for this next part. I remember going to dinner with my parents. My dad excused himself to go to the bathroom, and a random woman that I remember I did not know approached my mom, kindly greeting herself before leaning in and whispering something to my mom. The woman kept her eye on me and smiled while she whispered something to my mom. I remember my mom having this look of concern on her face, and the woman quickly walked away. I remember my mom talking to my dad in a very hushed tone when he returned. Both of them just looked at me. I don't remember if I asked the question or not, but I do remember for the rest of the vacation, I was kept very close to my parents, and my parents were constantly looking over their shoulders for the rest of the trip, as well as after the trip. As I grew older, I pushed these memories from my mind, until one time in my teen years, I remembered the trip because I was playing Super Mario Sunshine at the time and was reminiscing about it with my family. I then asked about that woman who had talked to my mom, and my mom was just straight up with me. She had told me that this woman had made a comment about how she would love to take me home and that she would do anything to have me. My mom obviously was very concerned with this, while my dad wasn't so much. But both of my parents told me that they did remember seeing this woman lingering around us for the rest of this trip. What they told me next was information I had never known about. They said that the morning that we were about to leave, to go back home, they had found a note on the hotel door that morning. They said the note they had found had said the same exact thing that she had told my mom, that she wanted their son. They continued keeping me close. My dad swears that he saw that woman at the airport, watching them. My mom said that it wasn't her, that she's not sure though. But that is how Mario Sunshine makes me think about how I was targeted for kidnapping when I was young. I grew up with both of my parents and my brother in a small rancher house within a suburb off of the highway. Things were always quiet, and crime rarely ever happened. We were the only kids on our street, and we were surrounded by other houses with old couples. Due to this fact, I was comfortably left at home quite often whenever the others wanted to go do something somewhere else late. The story occurred once my brother was old enough to drive and hang out with his old friends. One fateful night, my brother was out very late, and my parents went out on a date, planning to come back at around 11 p.m. I was playing Halo 3 all night. That dates my story if that helps. My 14-year-old self lived for these nights alone, gaming non-stop without interruptions until my parents came home. It is worth noting that I do have 2 large dogs at the time, and the living room has 3 huge windows which open toward the street. I could see about halfway down the driveway from the couch where I was gaming. At about 10:30 p.m., I hear what sounds like a car door. I'm thinking that it must be a neighbor, since I didn't see any car pull into the driveway. But the dogs said otherwise. Dogs were freaking out, as if my parents had just pulled in. I, not thinking anything of it, just stayed where I was and yelled for them to stop. Our dogs were all trained and waited patiently by the door. I see what looks like to be like a silhouette or two pass by the window, so I go to shut off the Xbox. Now I'm thinking that my parents came home a little bit early. No biggie. I put my controller away, and I hear the doorknob jingle. "It's unlocked," I yelled, as I go to the kitchen to get myself a glass of milk. Again, no biggie. I hear the doorknob jingling once more. The dogs go back to barking. Weird. I could have sworn that it was unlocked. "Hold on, I'm coming," I yell. I take a second to get my glass of milk prepared. Look, I was a teenager. I had selfish and dumb priorities back then. Looking back, I'm kind of glad that I did. That extra minute might have spared me. I go back to the front door, and I see that it actually was locked. Huh. It's kind of weird. I unlock it and walk away. "It's unlocked now," I say. I go back to the kitchen. The dogs basically have their noses against the door, trying to get to my parents. After about another minute, I'm genuinely confused. I go back and open the door. There's no one there. I peek my head out and look down the sidewalk. I look to the other side of the yard. There's no car or any person. The road is clear. Who the heck jingled my knob then? Where's the car door that I heard? Now I'm freaked out. I called Mom's cell and told her what happened. And then she said, "We're on our way home now. Call Mr. Jim," which was our next door neighbor who owns a 12 gauge, "and we'll be there soon." So I locked the house down as much as possible while calling Mr. Jim. He said he'd be right over. I'm looking outside, making an effort to look opposite of wherever he patrols, in case the perp, CSI lingo, ran from him. Absolutely no sign of anyone. Mr. Jim then comes inside and waits with me, saying that he didn't see or hear anything. Nothing like this has ever happened since. Neighbors never reported any break-ins or suspicious characters as far as I know. My mother is 100% convinced that it was just late, and I was delirious. Wouldn't be the first time that I sleptwalked or sleep-talked or anything like that, but I've learned to know the difference. I believe that I was fully conscious. Like I've said, I've lived a fairly normal and uneventful life. No crime or risk to my life to speak of, except for this one thing, so I thought I'd share. I'm not sure if this belongs here, but I did want to share. I understand this isn't something extremely creepy or odd, but it did make me feel uncomfortable. I don't know, I just wanted to share it. Maybe I'm just overreacting. I am a 21-year-old female, and I live in an apartment with my boyfriend who is 25 and his best friend who is also 25. I had called the leasing office to ask them for new blinds in my bedroom. Our bedroom has a glass window looking over our balcony, and we have vertical blinds. Sometimes the blinds get loose and break, and they fall. In particular, for example, we had at least 5 of them, and they just kept falling all the time. I called the leasing office last week and asked for replacements. We weren't notified that anything was fixed, and one blind kept falling, so I called again. They confirmed that somebody had already been out there to fix them, which they did, but must have missed one. I confirmed this, and they said that they would send someone else over to fix it for me. That was yesterday. Before I get into this actual encounter, I want to say, previously I had a run-in with a maintenance worker. The apartment policy is that they are required to knock, and if nobody answers, they can't just barge in. A few months ago, I had been in the shower and had gotten out and wrapped myself in a towel when I randomly see 3 random guys in my apartment. I was freaked out and quickly got dressed and asked what they were doing here. Apparently our roommate needed something and didn't give us the heads up. This entire encounter, they kept looking at me and one even kept smirking and smiling, and it made me feel very uncomfortable. My boyfriend ended up calling the leasing office, kind of pissed off, and basically explained that he wanted to receive calls anytime someone was coming over to this residence. Basically just notify me just in case. So, now today, I'm laying in bed and my class got canceled, so I'm waiting until 4:30 to go back to school. I normally wouldn't be home at this time. I heard a loud knock at the door, and I already knew it had to be the maintenance people. I quickly threw on some running shorts. I'm in an oversized t-shirt and make my way to the door. However, the door opens instead and in walks a man. He's at least 6 foot. He's a big guy. He's not overweight or not in shape either. I would describe him to be a linebacker body build. He's probably in his mid-40s, early 50s maybe. So I'm standing there in the middle of my apartment and I say hi. He stares at me and says, "Oh, no one was supposed to be home." I cock my head to the side and he emphasizes that he called and they said no one was home. I say, "Oh yes, that's my boyfriend. I'm supposed to be at school, but my class got canceled." He steps into the house and starts eyeing me, and I am instantly a little confused as to why he keeps looking me up and down, and I'm feeling uncomfortable, so I decided to walk away into the bedroom to grab a broken blind. I yank it down and turn back around, and while I'm doing this, he says, "Is your boyfriend?" I say yes. He watches me put the broken blind on the table. He's still smiling at me and giving me this weird look, continuing to look me up and down before walking past me into the bedroom. He stops halfway into my bedroom and turns around and says, "So, you do have a boyfriend, huh?" I'm getting annoyed and even more uncomfortable, and I say, "Yes, I live with him." He asked how old I am, and I nervously laugh and say, "I'm 21. He grins again and once again looks me up and down. "You don't look 21. I hear this all the time. I look a little bit younger than what I am. I'm also only 5'1", so that doesn't help at all. I say, "Well, I am," with my nervous laugh. He keeps smiling at me, and it's not an inviting smile. It's not one of those dad smiles where it's like, "Oh, you're my daughter's age, that's why," or something like that. It's an uncomfortable smile. It is a smile that makes me feel even more uncomfortable and confused. I say nothing and we literally just sit there staring at each other for about 15 seconds before I turn away and walk into the kitchen. I realize I have nothing else to do, so I walk back into the bedroom and grab the bowl that I had been using and bring it to the sink. From the corner of my eye, I can see him watching me. It takes literally 2 minutes to change the blind, and he comes back out. Instead of walking straight to the door, he stops outside of the bedroom, which is right beside the kitchen. He just stares at me, and I continue to keep myself busy. He isn't speaking, so I say, The broken blind is on the table. Do you want me to throw it away?" He doesn't break eye contact, and he's still smiling and says, "What table?" I know this motherfucker can see the table and is right next to him. It's literally in front of him. I point to the table. Right there?" He glances over and nods. "Yeah, I can throw it away for you." I say thank you, and he starts to walk away. He glances back a few times before he's at the front door. He opens and just stands there for a few seconds, but all of which creepy and unnecessary. I'm not sure how to explain it. It just seems as if he was hesitating for a few seconds. So he pauses and says, "I'll lock the door for you." I just nod my head and say thank you, and then he closes the door. This entire encounter was so creepy. Update. I told my boyfriend the story, and he was very upset. Said he doesn't want maintenance in our apartment without him or my roommate anymore, especially if I'm home alone. I'm not sure whether he plans to speak with them or not. The reason they have a key is because the apartment policy, and maintenance is allowed to enter. They have to knock first and let themselves be known, just in case somebody is home, and then they have the ability to enter. I don't feel too comfortable, but I also have a taser now. I also have wasp spray and pocket knives in my home, so I feel a little bit more safe and comfortable using those, if I have to. Our roommate only works about maybe 5 minutes away, and he never minds my calls and picks up immediately. So that is always very helpful. Thank you for the kindness and suggestions. I appreciate it all, and I hope you all stay safe. This occurred to my wife and I after I left the Marines. The story is much shorter than the last one. After leaving the military, I was obsessed with hiking and jogging. I like to push myself to see how much weight I could carry and how far I could run or hike. Every Sunday morning at 0500, my wife would drive me out to about 8 miles away from our apartment. I would road march, and I would also have a heavy pack just to take through town and back home. This particular Sunday was very warm. She dropped me off at the location. We said our goodbyes and she returned back to the apartment. It is not terribly dangerous where we live, but having done some combat deploys, I was always aware of my surroundings. Therefore, I was carrying a handgun that was typically located in our bedroom. When my wife returned to the apartment, she noticed that there was this white Honda which was parked near the front of our unit, which had not been there before. She thought that this was kind of odd because it was so early in the morning. She thought about not getting out of the car because she was a little creeped out. She decided to go in and walked in quickly. She got back into the bedroom to try and get some more sleep while I hiked home. Our apartment was ground level, and there was this big large bush located in the front of our window with gravel surrounding it. As she laid in bed, she heard some slight shifting of the gravel. She laid there silently, just listening. Then she heard heavy breathing, and she said that it sounded like there was somebody right there with their lips on our window. Due to the heat, our window was open. There was still a screen and large drapes. My wife laid there silently for several minutes, while the breathing continued. I don't know what came over her, but she got ballsy. She jumped up on the bed and threw the drapes open. She saw a grown man standing there, who immediately turned around and started walking around the corner, out of view. She didn't say anything to this man, but she could see his shadow from the light above. The man stood there still breathing really heavily. She described it almost as an intentionally loud. In a flash, the man took off in a dead sprint for the white Honda. My wife said that she had no idea what to do because she was terrified that he would return. She knew I had the gun, so she grabbed the K-bar, large military-style fixed blade knife that I kept underneath the mattress. She waited for about 5 minutes before running out of the house and getting into her car. She drove to the route that I had told her that I would be hiking and found me. I remember it clearly because my wife's car pulled up and she was bawling and she had the big-ass knife in her hands. She explained everything and she drove me home. I called the police on the way. When we arrived, the white Honda was gone. The police in the apartment complex had reported they had some reports from suspicious, unknown what they meant, activity happening recently in the early mornings. He was never caught to my knowledge. It creeps me out to this day that somebody is still out there, probably getting excited every time that he gets away with something. Not as scary as some of these, but when you consider how close your loved one was, or would have come, to possibly something happening, gives me the creeps. So, I want to start this off by saying I am a very skeptical guy. I became an atheist when I was about 17, and when my belief of God dissipated, the belief in everything else supernatural went out of the window as well. I also want to say that I've lived in Appalachia for all about 4 years, and I'm almost 22, and I have never experienced any of the creepy things people say about the Appalachian Mountains until the story I'm about to tell you. So, towards the end of the last year, 2023, me and two of my friends had a sort of quarter-life crisis, which eventually led us to getting rid of almost all of our belongings, quitting our jobs, leaving our apartments, and living out of our cars and door dashing around the country. Well, on our first night of our big trip, we went to stay with a friend of one of my traveling mates. She lived in Tennessee in the Appalachian Mountains, the Smoky Mountains specifically, which, for those of you that don't know, is like a subcategory of the Appalachians. She lived off of the back roads in the middle of the woods. The first night we were there, she had told us that there were good strange occurrences on the property. The house was haunted and there was something in the woods. She had told us this, but whatever it was in the woods likes to hang out around her shed. She said that one night she was walking up onto the porch when she got this overwhelming feeling of being watched. Becoming fed up with whatever it was, she screamed something along the lines of, "Go the fuck away," into the woods, only for something to scream right back at her. She claimed to have seen it one night from her kitchen window. She said that it was peeking around the shed, staring at her. It wasn't an animal, but it wasn't human either. Out of curiosity, I asked her to describe whatever this creature was that she had seen in more details, but she refused. I, being the skeptic that I am, basically disregarded everything that she had said and forgot about it. Now, because it was our first night on this trip, and it was so fun and new to us, we wanted to sleep in our cars, which were parked right in front of the shed that I mentioned earlier. Yes, that shed. We hadn't yet made window covers, so we were sleeping in 3 SUVs with uncovered windows completely surrounding us. But I had no issue with this. I thought the worst that could happen would be I'd wake up to a bear staring at me. So I went to bed peacefully and woke up in the middle of the night needing to pee. I got half dressed, put on my shoes, left my car, and walked to the edge of the woods, did my business, and got back in the car and went back to sleep. I had not a single care in the world. No uneasy feeling, no feeling of being watched, nothing. The next night, I once again woke up really needing to pee. So, just like I did the night before, I sat up in bed, put my pants on, got my shoes ready, and reached for the door handle. But I couldn't do it. It was like every hair on my body stood up on end, and I got this overwhelming feeling of dread and foreboding. Now, I had a makeshift bed in the back of my SUV, on top of all of the back seats that I flipped down. So, I'm sitting there in bed, looking around through all of my uncovered windows. I don't see anything outside, except some faint outlines of trees, and the glints off of the travel mates' cars. I neither saw nor heard anything. That should be putting me on edge. I reached for the door handle again, but I once again got this terrible feeling. I continued to look around, try to reach for the door, and withdraw my hand. I finally gave up and said screw it, and I just peed in an empty water bottle. The next morning I got up and started talking to the other traveling mates. and one of them mentioned waking up in the middle of the night, out of nowhere, and experiencing this overwhelming feeling of being watched. She sat up in her makeshift bed and looked all around, only to see nothing. I can't lie, when she said that, I got a bit of a knot in my stomach. I asked her what time it was when that happened, and she estimated that it was around the same time that I woke up, around 3 a.m. I then told both of them about my experience, and we were a little freaked out about it. When we were headed out of our cars the following night, we noticed that all of the homeowners' 5+ outdoor cats were all sitting on her front porch, which we hadn't seen the last 2 nights. Previously, they were all scattered around the property, if they were even in sight. We thought it was weird, but we didn't really think much of it. We all climbed into our cars and said our goodnights on the walkie-talkies. It was pretty warm and muggy, and it was a night of October, so we all had our battery-powered fans running. One of my friends frustratingly reported that her walkie-talkie was dying. Then my other friend reported that their fan had died. Then my walkie-talkie started dying, and it continued until, in the span of 5 minutes, all of our electronics for our camping gear, walkie-talkie, flashlights, and fans had all died. Finding this incredibly creepy, we all decided that we should just go inside and sleep in there. Better safe than sorry. We were gathering up all of our things to move inside when I began to hear what sounded like something large walking through the leaves in the woods. I kept stopping what I was doing and just kept looking towards my friends, who were standing right by the woods. They seemed unbothered every time, so I would just continue what I was doing. That was when I heard a louder noise coming from the woods, and finally decided to walk over to my friends. Turns out, one of them was standing watch while the other one gathered the rest of her things. Me and my friend stood there watching the other friend's back, and it kept sounding like whatever it was in the woods kept getting closer to us. Soon enough, my friend had gathered up all of her things, and we calmly, but quietly, went into the house. From what I can remember, we slept in the house the following night as well. But the night after that, one of my friends borrowed some sage from the homeowner and saged all along the property line and around our vehicles before we got ready for bed. We slept perfectly fine for that night, and every night after. No more weird feelings, noises, nothing. And of course, we were pretty much perpetually on edge the entire time after that. But it was never quite the same feeling of dread and foreboding that I had felt before. To be honest, I don't know what to make of it all. I know I didn't see anything, but the feeling I got was unlike anything I had ever experienced. That was the first and only time in my life where I have gotten that feeling, especially just out of nowhere. I've told the story a few times, and I've had a few people tell me that it was just possibly a bear. But I don't think a bear would give me that sort of instinctual feeling of danger when I can't even hear or see it. And I'm fully aware that I may be biased now, but I've lended a bit more credibility to the homeowner stories after my experience. For those of you that are curious, no, we're not still on the trip. Unfortunately, the whole thing went downhill after a couple of months, and we are now integrating back into society. We are, however, all still friends. And no, we did not experience anything like this again, despite staying at several campgrounds in the middle of the woods and other parts of the Southeast. My friend called and told me that she had seen something horrific in her backyard. I rushed over right away, and we sat down in her living room. I took immediate notice that she had all blinds shut on her windows. She sat across from me on the couch. Her breathing was heavy and labored like she had just finished a hard run, but I knew that wasn't the case. After a bit of silence, she told me what had happened as we sat in the dim lighting of the lamp next to us. I saw something outside. At first, it was on the edge of the trees. She stopped to again catch her breath and then continued. But when it saw me looking at it walked towards the house. She pointed towards the window behind me that overlooked her large, open backyard. I got up and walked over to the covered window. I reached and nervously pulled 2 blinds down, just to peer into the darkness. I saw nothing at first, but I focused my eyes on the trees lining the edge of the woods in the back. I could make out blotches of red on the bark. "Do you see anything?" she shouted at me, nearly sending me jumping through the window. I let go of the blinds and replied, "Not a thing, except some marks on the trees. Could be blood from an animal." I once again sat down beside her, closer this time. "Tell me what you saw." She let out a sigh and began. "This will sound absolutely crazy, but it's true, I swear." I nodded and leaned my head and listening intently. It was a skin walking. I replied in confusion, not sure I had heard her correctly. "A skin walking? Do you mean a skinwalker?" Tears formed in her eyes as she spoke with frustration. "No, not a skinwalker. I know what that is. I mean, I don't really know, but it wasn't that. It was something like someone's skin walking." I hadn't heard her wrong. The mental picture took shape in my mind and made my stomach do somersaults. I then did something I really didn't want to do. I asked her what it looked like. "What? Why do you want to know?" "I'm sorry, I just wanted to. It was somebody's cut off skin, walking in my backyard. No eyes, just empty black holes. And it left its blood trail as it came towards my house. It staggered out of the woods and knocked on the windows." Tears were now streaming down her cheeks. "I ran and hid in my room. Then I called you." Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you more. The question is now what to do next. Call the cops? And tell them what? That there's a skin monster walking around town. They'd probably arrest us. Before I could speak again, there was a loud thud on the window behind me. The story belongs to a friend of mine. He told me this once, and I simply have shared it. My friend is of a specific heritage of Native American. I'm not going to say it because I'm just going to butcher it. A Native American tribe who settled in the Pacific Northwest coast. He is quite the character. For one, he is a whopping 6'10" and has the blackest eyes you could imagine. He always has this frowning face going on, which makes him even more intimidating. He is everything but a bad guy, though. In fact, he's almost the most gentle of giants. He was working at the gas station up north in about 1992, and he was pretty much always working the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. when he was relieved. Business wasn't exactly booming at nights, so he was usually watching TV or reading magazines between customers, and there were a few of them. The area he lived and worked in was deeply associated with all things Native American. There was a potent sense of pride in the surrounding communities, but also very distinct presence of superstition and old traditions. My friend was no exception. He was a firm believer in the ways of the old. This made his encounter even more terrifying. One night, he was sitting there watching TV as usual when a customer entered the gas station. The customer paid for his gas, a pack of smokes, and a soda and returned to his car. Nothing unusual. But as my friend looked out of the window towards the customer's car, he spotted what looked like to be a huge dog sitting by the edge of the woods. Now, the window is located on the side of the building, some distance from the sliding door, overlooking the pumps and the roof covering it. On the sides of the roof are pretty strong halogen lights, which shine into the gas station. This gives that gas station like the not only an eerie lighting vibe, but with the blinds casting along like striped shadows and stuff. And also it blinds the teller to an extent. As he peered through the window, trying to focus on the dog, it was gone. He didn't think much of it, but even if it was a wolf, he was inside and wolves don't tend to rob gas stations at night. Wolves were common here, but this wolf was huge. He brushed it off and returned to his mindless watching of the TV. A couple of hours go by, and not a single customer has entered since the last one. He was just about to refill some condiments when he heard a large thud coming from the back. It wasn't inside, he could hear that, but it came from the back, and behind the building they kept the garbage. The gas station has been visited before by scavenging homeless people, but my friend really didn't care. It wasn't his garbage, and it was garbage. Let them take it. But it just kept getting noisier. He decided to grab a flashlight and a gun from the office and circle around the back to tell whoever ventured there to leave, as he had had enough. His presence alone would have scared off anyone, but he wanted to feel safe just in case. He exited through the sliding door, walking past the window he was sitting by. As he turns the corner, he shines the light at the dumpsters. As the cone of light hits the dumpsters, my friend instantly drops the flashlight and the gun. It's the huge dog he saw before, scoring through the garbage. It wasn't a dog though. It clearly stood on its hind legs, reaching the same height as him. It couldn't be a bear as it was too gaunt. The creature's eyes were also glowing in the light of the flashlight, making it even more terrifying. He ran inside the gas station, and he wasn't followed. He locked the door and stayed inside the whole night and quit the next day. My friend is still convinced that he saw a skinwalker, a shape-shifting shaman of sorts that are a common occurrence in the Native American lore and culture. So sorry for the absence of blood and guts and gore. It's just a really creepy story. Hello friends. So I came across some information about an old friend, which has left me, as these kids say nowadays, shook. I figured I'd make a post to sort through my thoughts and share a rather insane story. But before we get started, my name is Mikey, like Mikey but spelled weirdly, and I'm in my 20s. Also, I'd like to apologize of how overly sarcastic this post may seem. Humor is my defense mechanism. The story mentions murder, but I don't go into too much detail. Stay safe out there, friends. When I was an angsty teenager, I moved in with my mother and stepdad to escape a less than desirable situation. Because of the move, I was enrolled in a new school. The school was located in one of the sketchiest neighborhoods in the city. Everyone who resided in that area was relatively low income, my family included. We had a rec center that was near the school that was really the hotspot for, let's call them, undesirables, which was primarily teenage boys wandering over from a nearby high school to catcall the girls. Lunchtime was my favorite. I loved going outside for chow and having sweaty teen boys asking for the nasty. Note the sarcasm. Anyway, during my time at my shitty school, I made an array of friends. However, there was one person who became my best friend. Let's call her Blondie. She and I got along like, what's the negative connotation? I was a people pleaser, and she took advantage of that. Blondie was nice enough, but she was also problematic. Regardless, we were fast friends, and thus became a very short-lived friendship. Over the school year, she mainly came over to my house since I was the only child. We usually had the house to ourselves while our folks were at work. However, she finally invited me to her house around the middle of the school year. I was super excited. I had always wanted to meet her family, since they had always been such an enigma. Blondie wasn't one to divulge information about her home life. All I knew was that she lived with her mother, stepdad, and young sibling. I'm unsure if she was just embarrassed or didn't care to share, but I finally had the honor of meeting them. Honestly, our family was amazing. They were kind and they treated me very well. Not to mention, her stepdad was a phenomenal cook. The best spaghetti and meatballs I've ever had. After that, I started going to her house more and more often. And you know what? I really enjoyed it. Fast forward to a month or two before the end of the school year, and it's Blondie's birthday. Our family was throwing a little get-together at their house, and I was invited. Blondie and I headed to her house after school, and it was a really fun time until near the end of the day. Now, I knew next to nothing about her biological father. I knew he wasn't in the picture. He'd sometimes drop by and say hello, but I never personally met him. That was until he had made a surprise visit to give Blondie a present. When I tell you that there was a shift in the atmosphere, I kid you not, I could immediately feel it. And I was a dumb kid. We were inside the living room, eating some cake, and there was a knock at the front door. Blondie's mom answered, and her face, which once had a smile, turned into a scowl. If looks could kill, the dude would be dead. She moved aside and this man walked in. I'll never forget how everyone in the room got tense except for Blondie, who excitedly greeted her dad. At the time, he seemed like a normalish dude. Maybe a tad bit creepier side, but who am I to judge? Blondie introduced me to her father, and we shared some pleasantries. At one point, I was invited to get some ice cream with them the following day, which I accepted. I mean, I was getting free ice cream. Of course I was going to say yes. He eventually left, and we all got back to eating cake. I had honestly forgotten about the whole reaction everyone had upon seeing him. Maybe if I remembered, I would have said no. Anyway, the following day rolled around, and I went for ice cream with Blondie and her dad. I can't remember much from that day other than him asking me if I had a boyfriend or girlfriend, which seemed innocent enough, but the way he asked, it just made me feel weird. I honestly can't remember much from the other encounters with this man. Nothing really jumps out to me. I know I went with him and Blondie a few more times before my family moved to another city and we lost touch. Fast forward a few years, and I'm attending college. I had managed to stay in contact with one person from the middle school days. Let's call her Teddy. She had reached out to me one day, asking if I wanted to go to a movie, which I happily accepted. I was balls deep in the big sad at the time, and needed a pick-me-up. A film with an old friend was just what I needed. I took the train to a nearby mall, and Teddy and I watched the movie. After we headed to the food court to get some chow, we were catching up. It had been a couple of years since we had last saw each other, when Teddy suddenly perked up. She asked me if I heard about Blondie's father, to which I said that I hadn't been in contact with her since I had moved. Teddy's face lit up, and she told me the most mind-blowing story my little brain could have ever heard. She informed me that Blondie's father had murdered a woman. Now, before I continue, She was going based on the word to mouth while she was telling me all the details. Teddy had no news articles or police reports to back up any of her story. She was told by a friend who had heard it from someone else, and so on. But what she told me wasn't actually far from the truth. According to her, Blondie's father had taken the life of a street worker. He got away with it for 2 years, and his truck got him caught. Apparently there was something unique about it. Teddy couldn't tell me much more because she genuinely didn't know. I remember going back to my dorm and trying to Google for more details, but I couldn't find a damn thing about it. I eventually forgot about the story until last year, 2023. I was discussing this crazy story from my life with a friend, and I suddenly remembered Teddy's story. After some digging, I finally found an article that described the exact crime. I clicked on it, and when I saw the picture of the man, well, words can describe what I felt. Everything Teddy told me was true, but it was so much worse than what she had thought. Out of the respect of the victim and her family, I won't describe what he did, but he was arrested 3 years after he had taken her life. I can't find any information about it or about how he was caught, but it had something to do with his truck. He was charged with manslaughter. He took a plea bargain and indignity to a body and only served about 7 years of his 14-year sentence. He had served half already because he was in custody during the trial. I looked him up again not too long ago, and I learned some unsettling information which prompted me to write this post. He was released from prison a few months ago. Guess what he did? Killed another woman. From what I've read, it had similarities to the other murder that he had committed. This time around, he's charged with second-degree murder and indignity to a body. There's unfortunately still not a lot of information about the second woman, but both of his victims were mothers. They were both cruelly taken out of this world, and I still can't wrap my mind around this all. I met this monster. I was best friends with his daughter. I don't think I was personally in any danger, but the fact that I had met someone capable of some heinous crimes, it scares the living shit out of me. I can't even begin to imagine how Blondie must have felt after learning that her father had committed those crimes. Anyway, I apologize for the length of the story and how vague I was regarding the crime. I know some of you really want to know everything, but it didn't feel right to share their story, especially since it had little to do with me. I was just the schmuck that was friends with the daughter. Also, I would like to provide more information about how Blondie is, but I can't remember her last name for the life of me. She doesn't share the same one as her dad. Regardless, thanks for reading. The story I'm about to tell you is 100% true. This happened sometime in November of 2010. I was fishing with my friend Rico in the lake near the country club of Miami. To no surprise, we never caught anything. We were ready to give up until Rico noticed a blue case by the shore that was covered up poorly by some leaves. As we got closer, the smell was horrible. Rico was actually about to throw up. I had a high tolerance for these foul odors and stuff like that, so I went up to the case and opened it. I never thought I would ever see this in my life, but in the case, it was a human body part. It was hard to tell what part it was due to how horrible the plastic bag was, assuming it was trying to hide a body part. We called the police, to which, surprisingly, they arrived very quickly, and the area was soon a crime scene investigation. A couple of days passed by, and of course, since I'm curious about the situation, I looked for the news articles online, and it turns out the body part that we found was a male torso, and it was one of the two other body parts that were found. The other two parts were hidden in different parts of the Broward County. To make matters worse, the body parts were from the same person, and the guy who killed him didn't have a motive. He just killed him. Turns out the police were struggling to find clues to catching this murderer, because at the time, there was other separate incidents similar to this one, and after we called about the torso, they had information that was able to locate and arrest this murderer. To this day, he remains in jail, but this is still a pretty scarring situation, considering I had never seen a dead person, let alone a body part. And to make matters worse, we found this behind a middle school. If anyone is interested in actually researching it, just look up Country Club Middle School Dead Body. I've been listening to a podcast about serial killer Israel Keys, and it made me remember the story from my childhood. I would be interested to know if anyone has any insights based on this context, time, and location. This occurred sometime between 1999 and 2001 in northern Illinois. I was about 9 years old. My mom and I were driving home from some event, and it was late at night, probably 9 or 10 p.m. We were traveling down a otherwise empty road, going through an open farmland. We eventually caught up to this black pickup truck, and after a few minutes, we found ourselves at the red light behind this truck. When the light turned green, the man didn't go. Instead, he parked his truck and got out. He walked up to my mother's driver's side door. We expected him to lean down and possibly ask for directions or something, but he didn't. He just stood there. He was tall, so we couldn't see his face from the inside of the car. He stood so close, he was practically pressing against it. All we could see were his thighs, hips, and the window, as he was so tall. He just stood there in silence for a moment, then turned around, went back to his truck, and drove away. My mom always thought this man intended to do something very bad, but thought she was the only one in the car. When he walked up, he may have seen me for the first time, and perhaps the idea of a child or two victims at once made him lose the nerve. My mom remembers him having dark hair and possibly a beard, but it's been about 20 years. I think it's kind of a crazy coincidence that if this man was Keys and he was in the military around that time, but it was a scary experience nonetheless. I am rather new to Reddit, and I do not know if all of these stories on the No Sleep are true, but the story I'm about to tell you is true. Here is the story. I found out about this story not too long ago, maybe 4-ish months ago, if I have to say. It came from my grandmother, along with my mother and some of our other family members. One day when I was much younger, I found a Ouija board in my grandma's basement. I never liked the room where the games were, because my grandpa had always told me that the boogeyman lived down there when I was little. I brought the board upstairs and asked my mom and grandma what it was. They told me about it, and my grandma let me take it home. I never played with it because it frightened me. I would get a cold feeling when I walked by it, and I would lose sleep over it. Finally, I gave it back to my grandma. Years later, I was doing research on the paranormal. So I decided to look into this Ouija board that my grandma had again. So, while visiting, I grabbed it from downstairs and brought it upstairs. Then my grandma and mom told me the story about it. The story is about my mother's best friend's sister. She and her friends were all hanging out one night and decided to play with it. After all, they were older girls, almost 18, almost out of high school. So, they began playing, but the girls decided to ask questions that apparently you should not ask. When am I going to die? And the board's reply was, prior to 18. The girls were freaked out a little bit, but after they all calmed down, they got over it. Then, 2 days later, she died in a car crash, and the board had never been used since. I have always had fascination of Ouija signs, but I would never play with them, because I have always heard enough stories of which I could not sleep. A friend of my mother once played with a Ouija board, and she was a teen. She just asked things like, how many children should I have, and if she would marry, and with whom. The board said that she would have 2 children, and it also spelled out the name of her husband to be. For privacy reasons, I will call him Eric. So guess what? 11 years later, she met Eric. They got married and they now have 2 daughters. Nothing bad happened, but keep in mind, Ouija boards are not toys. I was a freshman in high school when I became friends with Sammy. Sammy was 2 years older than me, and she was the girl that no one wanted to get into a fight with. I'll describe her for a minute. She was a tall, skinny girl with long black hair that fell down her shoulders and back. She had red highlights, and now that I think about it, she could definitely use a trim back then. She always wore dark makeup, and maybe a red flag for many, but I thought she was cool. Secretly, I just wanted to be friends with her, because she didn't really have any. She was yelled and laughed at. The popular kids would call her the voodoo chick. Despite the age difference, Sammy and I became good friends. I didn't understand why people made fun of her, but yes, she was different, but didn't we all really experience a period in which we were weird and different? It was just before the summer holidays that Sammy and I decided to go to a house party that was hosted by a classmate. Around 11:45, we were sitting on the couch around this glass table with a Ouija board on it. Sammy had taken it with her. She must have thought that it was cool to bring. Anyways, we asked it stupid questions. Obviously, we were just playing around with it, not knowing the damage that it could cause. We took it more seriously when nobody was playing anymore. But yet, the blanket kept moving. Things moved on their own, and Sammy seemed to become happier every time something creepy happened. She kept saying things like, "Don't worry, she won't harm us." We never got an explanation about that. The board answered all the questions without us touching it. I didn't want anything to do with it anymore, but Sammy wanted to and decided to ask, when am I gonna die? It took a while before the blanket moved. It moved to 6. But what does that mean? 6 hours, 6 minutes, 6 days, weeks, months, years? We laughed it off as just a joke because we were all so scared. We closed the circle and ended the night. Sammy didn't come back to school after the summer holidays. Nobody knows why. She no longer wanted contact with anyone, and she didn't want to see anyone. I just graduated from high school and read the newspaper during my lunch at the office. When I turn the page, my heart stops as I see a "Rest in peace, dear Sammy." According to the page, she committed suicide without even saying goodbye or leaving a note behind. The only thing she left was that old Ouija board and 6 diaries. So, I had a pretty unconventional upbringing. I grew up listening to Black Sabbath and the like, and my mom has always been into everything that could pass as not quite normal. She's been reading my tarot cards since I was 7. One of my childhood pastimes was contacting the dead. We would traditionally use Scrabble tiles, placing them in a circle A to Z with pieces of paper with numbers and the word yes and no written on them. I might not be explaining it well, but I'm sure y'all could Google it to find out what kind of setup I mean. We would then take a small glass, usually a sherry glass, and drag it around the walls of the living room to seal the room. We would take up position around the table, and each of us would place a forefinger lightly on the glass. My mom is very sensitive to things like this, and usually we would have something come through immediately. You can feel the energy in the glass, I swear. So, we had been doing stuff like this for years, and there has always been a feel or something being there at Mom's house. It has never been a malevolent force. In fact, besides being a little mischievous, this presence would wake up my brother if he was running late for school, or help me find my hairbrush. I never felt threatened until the last Ouija board we did. We set up the table and sealed the room, and first it was like a normal anytime session, but after a while, the atmosphere thickened, was almost tangible, and whatever was speaking to us was clearly not there to idle chit-chat. This being called itself Legion, and its parting words to us was, "Choose your side, for this is the end of days. I am coming." And the energy left the glass. The atmosphere thinned out. We packed up pretty fast after that. It wasn't until a few weeks after I had started having the night terrors. I would wake up in the middle of the night, paralyzed. There was something in my room with me. With each night terror, the thing in my room came closer and closer to my bed. Then, one night, I awoke into this thing standing over me, inches from my face. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could barely breathe. This thing would never harm me, while I was awake at least. It would pull the covers off of me, move things around in my room, and I would wake up with scratches and bruises that had no explanation. I was terrified of going to bed. I couldn't be on my own. I was a mess. This went on for weeks, and then something happened that I just didn't see coming. I felt another presence. I felt very strongly that this presence was a she, and she was there to protect me. Every night I would go to bed and try to fall asleep. I would wake up, and there she would be, somewhere close by, keeping that thing away from me. I had started to imagine, or maybe even see, what this girl looked like. She was young, maybe 14 to 15, with long, blonde hair over her face. She looked malnourished, and her clothes were dirty and tattered. Eventually, the dark thing stopped showing up. Maybe it got bored. I don't know, but Blondie, she stuck around. I had told my mom about the dark thing, and she put it down to bad dreams. But the worse it got, the more she believed the things I was saying. So when I told her about Blondie, I expected her to be a little skeptical, but instead she accepted my story. I began describing Blondie. I told my mom she was young, thin, with long hair, before I could tell her that it was blonde. My mom looked at me and said, "She's blonde, isn't she?" I was a little startled. My mom continued, "A few days ago, I was walking to the fridge, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a young girl with blonde hair sitting on the bottom step." It gives me goosebumps to just think of this. But still, I don't know if the dark thing in my room was the same being claiming to be Legion. I don't know if Blondie was the original malevolent force that we had felt in my mom's house. What I do know is our Ouija board allowed something to come into our house, something mean and malevolent, something that wanted to hurt me. I haven't done Ouija for a long time now, and have no intention of ever doing it again. We had been playing with things that we didn't understand and couldn't control, and I strongly advise you to never participate in stuff like this. It really is not as fun as you'd think. Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to like, comment, and if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to check out the links in the description, like Twitter, Instagram, everything like that is in there, including my Gmail if you would like to submit a story. I've got a lot of content and a lot more coming, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. With that being said, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one.